Welcome back to another episode of the Equipping ELLs podcast. We are on episode 2 of our series, Dismantling Misconceptions about English Language Learners. Today, we're tackling the harmful misconception that ELL students are starting from scratch in their learning journey. This view ignores the wealth of knowledge, skills, and experiences that our multilingual learners bring to the classroom and really often focuses solely on their English proficiency. Joining us today is the incredible Valentina Gonzalez, an educational consultant, author, and passionate advocate for multilingual learners. As a former ELL herself, Valentina brings both personal insight and decades of professional experience as a teacher, ESL facilitator, and professional development leader. Valentina is renowned for her impactful sketch notes, including messages like, "My job is to embrace, not erase, languages," and ESOL is not an intervention, period. These inspire educators to reflect on their role in advocating for multilingual learners. In today's episode, we'll explore how our words and actions shape the educational experience of ELL students and discuss strategies for valuing their linguistic and cultural assets while challenging misconceptions. Welcome, Valentina. It is such an honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's an honor that you invited me to speak to your followers and your audience.
Absolutely. I know that they are going to gain so much wisdom from what you have to share with us today. And we are going to dive right in because I want to hear from you and all these. You have so much that you have to share. So let's dive in with a really popular post that I see that's being shared on different social media platforms, that you have an infographic that you've created that says ESOL is not an intervention, period. And I want to start there because this is a common misconception and belief that's really harmful to our students. And I know is happening across different schools in the United States through teachers, administrators, just having this mindset that this ELL support service is the same as having an intervention, a reading intervention, whatever you want to call it. But that's really harmful to our students. So let's break that down. Let's unpack that. And can you share more about that?
Yeah, you're right. When I shared that idea on social media, it quickly became really popular. A lot of shares, retweets, and likes. And I also got some pushback on it, and I still do today. You know, learning another language, acquiring another language is not a deficit. It is not a reason to put someone in an intervention, because when we put an intervention into place, it means that we are trying to fix a problem or trying to change something about a person's learning that isn't adequate. And our students who are acquiring a new language already have a language in place. They have a language system. They have a way to think. And therefore, our ESL program shouldn't be part of the intervention system. Valuing a student's first language and honoring it and ensuring that we're respecting their first language has to happen in the first teach, in Tier 1 instruction. When we say that ESL is an intervention, it implies that there is something wrong with the language that our students have, and that we want to prioritize English or fix what students are coming to us with. I'll tell you a little bit about when I first became an ESL teacher. Prior to being an ESL teacher myself, I taught in the mainstream classroom. I taught third grade, I taught fourth grade, and then I was nudged into teaching ESL. And I'm so glad that I had that opportunity, because it actually became such a beautiful experience for me, and my life came full circle because, like you said, I myself was an English learner when I came to America and started school. When I began teaching ESL, the team I was on, my ESL team, we were part of the intervention team at our campus. And after that first year I was on this team, I began to think about, like, why are we part of the intervention team? What are we
Yeah.
intervening? Why are we fixing these
Mm-hmm.
kids who are coming to us from around the globe? Literally, kids from Japan and Venezuela and Denmark, and bringing to our classrooms this wealth of knowledge, these assets, linguistic, cultural, all of this amazing richness. Why are we part of an intervention team? We are sending such a negative message to the kids, to to colleagues, to families, when we say we're part of an intervention team. So after that first year that I was on this team, I asked to meet with the principal in the summertime. And I thought about, what am I going to say to her? How am I going to approach this? How am I going to tell her I don't want our ESL team to be part of intervention, because words matter.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wrote it down. I wrote down what I was going to say, my talking points, and I just, I went in and I told her, I really think that it's important for us to to be part of a team that embraces the linguistic assets of our students. And that starts with how we talk about kids, how we label or not
Mhm.
label the kids we have. And though our English learners, our multilingual students, may need interventions,
Mhm.
our ESL team cannot be called an intervention. We're divided out of the intervention team. We became our own team, our ESL team by itself, and the
Mm.
interventionists
Yeah.
were on their own as well. And at first, even that was a little pushback, because the
Mhm.
interventionists thought we were trying to do something against them. Like, it was not about the educators. It was about the kids and the
Mhm.
families and the linguistic assets and the way we see our kids and what they have. And it ended up, after time, being a very positive thing for everyone.
Yeah.
But it's like you said in the beginning, Beth. The other really popular post that I shared was about embracing, not erasing language, and that evolved for me over time as well. It's something that has shaped me since I was a young child, and I can share with you. When I was a kid growing up, I was in a language classroom where my linguistic assets were completely ignored.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I never wanted that to happen to the kids I worked with.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. If you want to briefly share just a little bit of your history, because you came from former Yugoslavia, is that correct?
That's
And
right.
how old
Yeah.
were you when you entered the United States?
When my family came to America, I was just a toddler. So I was around 3 years old. So in our home, we were just acquiring our I was just acquiring my first language. So was my brother. He was a little older than me. And we didn't speak English at all at home. And so I started learning English when I started elementary school as a kindergartner. But no one ever tapped into my first language. It was never, brought into the academic arena. I spoke Serbian at home and I spoke English at school. And so over time, because that language was ignored, and I don't think teachers did it knowingly. I don't think anyone did it maliciously, but because that first language was ignored over time, it became invisible. And I felt that English was such a priority that by middle school, none of my teachers knew I was multilingual. None of them knew that I was bilingual. I hid it really well because I thought that my teachers wanted me to speak English. I thought my teachers wanted me to be like everybody else, and so I wanted to be like everybody else. I didn't realize the power of that bilingualism, the linguistic assets that I
Yeah.
had. I didn't know they were special. I hid them
Yeah.
away.
That's such a powerful story. And I think, just really hitting on that point that our words and our thoughts around how we show up to support multilingual learners really do matter. Even that one word of intervention, that matters. It matters big time because this what you're setting for our students is very different, as you've explained so beautifully, of an intervention is something that you're fixing. There's something that's not adequate that you're and is that the message that we want to share to our students? Is that our beliefs? And that's why sometimes these topics can be really tough. And I'm not surprised you got pushback, because that means you're probably on the right path, right? If you're getting some pushback on that, because it's uncomfortable, but it's something that we need to grow in as educators, as if we're keeping what's best for our students at the forefront. That is what's best, is to really learn how to come around them and really create these spaces where
Right.
they're not hiding their native language. I know so many situations where that the students really wanted to have nothing to do with their native language. They
Mhm.
didn't want to keep it up at all. And even parents, believing that we're in the US, we're all going to just forget about who we were and try to assimilate and try to all speak English only. And it's sad to see, older students now who've lost completely their native language and they're not bilingual anymore. But we in this day have that power to change those thoughts and those beliefs in our classrooms.
Yes. And so much of what you said is, I hear it all the time, and it's so powerful. But a lot of teachers think, well, I am an interventionist because I'm pulling kids out of the classroom. And while you may be pulling kids out of the classroom or pulling them in a corner to work on English language development, um, those kids may be newcomer students and may need that small group pullout for a short amount of time, but they are still getting that. They should be getting the majority of their linguistic support in that tier 1 instruction, where all learners get linguistic support, because every learner is acquiring more language, whether it's in their first language or they're developing it in their second or third language. But every learner is getting that linguistic support in that first teach. And if they're not, then we need to look at the systems that we have in place in our campus, in our district. And then the other thing that you said that was so important is these families and students that think they have to assimilate and leave their first languages behind. Years later, when they're adults, they realize, oh my goodness, that first language is so important to me and it's so valuable. And then they do try to regain it. It's kind of like a treasure you've hid in the attic. You forgot about it for decades. And one day you go up in the attic and you look at it and say, my grandmother gave this to me 30 years ago, and I forgot about this. And you dust it off and you realize it's worth millions of dollars, literally a treasure. And you dust it off and use it again. And we don't want our children to go through that, where they lose that treasure for decades and have to dust it off. They should be able to use it every day
Yes,
and realize its value, because that's how important language is. And
absolutely.
our families, they need to know it too. They shouldn't feel the pressure to assimilate and lose their culture and their language and all of that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so good. That leads us right into this question of, how can educators design culturally inclusive and language affirming classrooms that recognize and leverage the diverse backgrounds of multilingual learners?
Culturally inclusive pedagogy can't come it's not something we're going to buy on a program or pick
Yeah.
up just by reading a book. It's really a way of teaching, a way of thinking, a way of recognizing who students are, who families are, how they bring themselves to the spaces. And all of us who educate in a culturally responsive way. We're responding culturally to someone. But when we do it in a culturally inclusive way, then we're trying to include all of our students and families. And that's the difference, because we're all being culturally responsive, but when we are culturally inclusive, we're thinking about the kids we have, the families that we have, and we're incorporating them into the instructional space.
Mm.
There are big things and little things we can do. Little things are providing wait time. That's so simple. And it doesn't take a lot of prep work. It
Yep.
just is intentional. Providing that wait time so that when we ask a question, our students have time to think about what we have asked, process it, possibly translate,
Mm.
build courage. So we're not passing them up.
Yeah.
So we're not sending the wrong message that their thinking is not important. So yeah, I mean, think time is really easy, but culturally inclusive absolutely means valuing their language, which means asking, how do you say this in the languages you know? And
Mm.
writing those words on our spaces, or including books in other languages. And while these things seem like, yeah, of course we can do that, they don't happen often enough in classrooms. We
Yeah.
don't see languages other than English as a pervasive experience in most of the classrooms around the United States, or in, across the world, just including other languages in the space.
Yeah. And that really, goes back to the topic of this podcast of that misconception that we're starting from scratch. If we have that belief as educators that these
Yeah.
students who are coming in are empty and we're filling them with what we have to share, we're missing out on so much that they have to offer. And I know, I've talked with members in Equipping ELLs and different teachers who are working, and I know that it feels uncomfortable to allow a native language being spoken in your classroom when you might not know that language. That's usually the pushback. Well, I don't know. What if I don't know what they're saying? And what if it just, creates this chaos in the room? And I think those are valid. We've all been there where we start to feel maybe this is uncomfortable, maybe it's getting out of control. But I always go back to Emily Francis was on the podcast a while back, and she made a statement that was so just eye-opening. And she said, what if instead of worrying about what they're saying or that it's going to get out of control, what if we start with trust and respect for who our students are and
Yeah.
give them opportunities to use their native language in different ways? And
Yeah.
I thought that was so important. Just again, that mindset shift of, are we worrying about the worst case that could happen by allowing their native language to be used in instruction? Or are we seeing the incredible benefits of bringing that piece in to our classrooms? And I thought that was, just something to really, again, those mindset shifts.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an easy way, bringing their voices in, however they speak, however they communicate, is just a great way. I'm glad you shared that. Emily's a great resource.
See, yes. I mean, all of you, I'm just inspired by your story too. And, I think this is something that's really important, is just the story you shared of you taking a step out and taking a risk and having that meeting with your administration because you are feeling and sensing, this isn't right. And I think that that's really where so much change can happen in our schools, is by one teacher just observing and reflecting and thinking through and saying, I don't feel good about this. And I hope that that inspires people who are listening today to just take those steps out and have those conversations, not be afraid to, continue with what's being put forth, because we know in school sometimes things are set for years and people don't like change. But if we really want what's best for our students, it's really about taking those risks. So I love
Yes.
that part of your story. So let's talk about that, with that administrator that you talked to, and thankfully they were responsive and made a change, and that's awesome. But how can school leaders and administrators play a more active role in dismantling misconceptions about ELLs and fostering a more inclusive school culture? Because I know, people who are listening, they might be that one teacher in the school who's trying to advocate and just feeling like this is a never-ending battle. And we know that if it starts from the top down, if leadership can really embrace this, then that's where a lot of change can happen a lot faster. So what do you have to say about that?
I've worked with I've been a leader, and I am a leader, and the thing is that we all have to embrace our role as leaders. So even when I was a classroom teacher, when I was an ESL teacher, I embraced my role as I am a leader in this space. So I'm going to lead from where I am. When I worked with, and when I do today work with administrators, assistant principals, central office leaders, what I've observed is the ones that are most effective with supporting teachers of multilingual learners and families are the ones that stay in touch, that really have their finger and their pulse on how families and students and educators are working together and collaborating. These are the leaders who attend professional development, listen to podcasts like yours, ask questions, go into classrooms. These are the leaders that are taking the initiative, not because they will know all the answers, but because they are going to find out. They're going to lead learning walks on their campus and observe classrooms with their teachers and look for those supports that are helping multilingual learners and other students in the classroom, and debrief how this is working with the stakeholders, and talk about what's working, what isn't working, what are our next steps. Those are the most effective things we can do with our feet on the ground in the campus. I think that the leaders that I've seen that are hands off and just sit back and say, you know what, this is not my problem, those are the ones that aren't moving the needle.
Yeah.
And then our students suffer, our teachers suffer, our families suffer, and the problems arise when we don't all take the responsibility for serving all of our students.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think too, anybody who's worked with, ELL students in any capacity knows that every group you work with is very different, every grade level, every demographic. And so I think that that's such a huge, important piece to share, is it's just having the ground on the feet, right? We all need a role in this, because the group of students at your school need something, or maybe the experience the teachers have that they're bringing into this are different than in another school. And so there's not a one size fits all. And that's really looking at our ELLs as a problem that we're trying to fix, and so how do we really, again, look and say, what is our approach to this? Are we embracing these students and the culture they bring in? Or are we seeing, and sadly, a lot of times it's more of the opposite of, okay, we have this problem, we need to get these kids up to speed, we need to close the gap. And if that's our attitude towards working with these students, we're never going to get there. It's really what you're hitting on, Valentina, and what you share through your resources and platform is just embracing these students and really helping them blossom and flourish. Because when that happens, there's success. I mean, it's incredible to see what they're able to do when they're in an environment like that.
Absolutely. What I've noticed most with administrators that do that is that they are really good listeners. They sit back and they listen, they observe, and they take in what's happening, like you said, on their campus, because all of our campuses, our needs are different. We have schools that are very high populations of a certain group of
Right.
students, maybe Hispanic, maybe students from, certain parts of the country, but all demographics are different. And then within that, also there are so many differences and needs. And even our teachers, all of our teachers have different needs as well. So just being really good listeners and observers of what's happening.
I love that. Absolutely. Well, we're running out of time, but I want you to take a few minutes and share some low prep, high impact strategies that teachers can implement immediately to support language development and academic growth for ELLs across different grade levels. Because I think, even your example of just the wait time, it's very simple. And it's something I think every teacher, I think of myself when I was teaching, I gave very little wait time, and there's so much power in providing that time and that space and really purposeful time. So, can you share a few more like that?
Yeah, I would say one really high impact, easy to implement strategy is just looking at words and making those cross linguistic connections. That's high impact for multilingual learners and all of our students as well. So if we're looking at a word like, let's say, subtext, we might look at the prefix sub and brainstorm all the words that start with sub and really analyze what these words mean, because that analysis helps students to see that the prefix sub has a meaning, and look at all these words, they have connections. Then we might look at those cross-linguistic connections as well. In my language, what do these words mean? Or does sub have the same connection? And we're looking at maybe how languages are similar and how they're different. So looking at words and analyzing words has a big impact on vocabulary development. And of course, I would incorporate a lot of visuals and movements and gestures with that kind of vocabulary development too. And with that being said, when I use visuals, I always label those visuals as well, drawing a line to certain aspects. So visuals, we know that with ESL and bilingual, visuals are always a big thing. When you talk about acquiring a new language, I don't think there's ever a point where we don't use visuals. It's what we do with those visuals that can really make a big impact. So when we use visuals, we want to incorporate that language development piece of it. The visual is allowing access to thinking. So when we look at a visual, we begin to think about what we see, and we think in the language that we think in. But if we're going to develop language, we want to increase the words and the language structures that we want our students to start adding. And so labeling that picture in all the languages our students know is going to help them begin to develop more language. And then we can increase that also by using words in sentences with that picture. So those are just a couple of ways to increase language development and content in your classroom. We don't want to isolate the two. We want to always connect and integrate and never, make them two separate things.
Yes, I 100% agree. Everything, content and context is what we need, because our students our brains aren't created to do standalone drills of language learning. It's not successful. So I love that so much. And you have so many resources that, anybody who's listening, whether you're brand new to working with ELL students or you've been teaching for a long time, you have a wide range of supports and tools that I absolutely love to just, you make it simple and clear, and it's really helpful. And I also love your book about reading and writing center. So you just have a ton of different resources. Will you share more with my listeners where they can find more about you and just some of the things you're doing right now?
Sure. If you just head over to www.valentinaesl.com, you can see, all the different resources. I started by writing a blog on this website, and I still continue to write it, not as
Mhm.
often as usual, but I'm still writing on it. I have a new book that's coming out in any day now. It's
Yay.
Yes, it's called Welcome to Teaching Multilingual Learners. It's an illustrated guide. I
That sounds awesome.
co-authored it with Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry, and it's an illustrated guide. So those graphics you mentioned that I draw, it's filled with those. So I hope that you love it. I hope that you pick up a copy and tell me what you like about it. Or if you don't, tell me that also. I also have a Facebook group that has been a really nice community where educators from around the globe have joined together and created a space where we can discuss topics about teaching multilingual learners. That is called Advocating for Multilingual Learners. So feel free to join. It is a private group. And we just celebrate successes and ask questions that maybe we don't. We want to learn from other people's perspectives. So those are just a couple of ways you can connect with me. I'm also on all the social media channels. Valentina ESL is the hashtag or handle I most use. So find me there.
Wonderful. And we will put some of those links in the show notes, and make sure to grab that book. That's going to be an incredible resource. And your Reading and Writing Center's one too. So that's an awesome one as well. Well, thank you so much, Valentina. This was incredibly helpful, and just, I love hearing all that you have to share. You're such an inspiration and an advocate for our multilingual learners. So thank you so much for your time today. And I'd love to have you back on again. Maybe we could talk about reading and writing, because I know that that's a huge area that we get lots of questions about. And I'd love to pick your brain more about that. So hopefully you'll be back again soon.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much.